Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We're glad that you're here. Today is the 65th episode. I can't believe we've been doing this for well over a year. We're going to get to our COVID news a little bit later in the show, as well as some of our local news. But first of all, I want to welcome my guest today, who is Dr. David Brophy, recently retired from the University of Michigan after a massive career. And the reason I wanted to bring Dr. Brophy on the show today is because I think sometimes we don't recognize the shoulders of the giants that we stand on. Way back in the day, MedTech and entrepreneurship and things like venture capital weren't even words in our language in the state of Michigan. And David Brophy played a gigantic role in getting those things going. We're going to talk about that today and where it goes from here. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks very much, Gene. I want to compliment you on your efforts here. This is a great addition to our ecosystem.
Well, it's an ecosystem that you, in large part, got rolling in many ways. The events and the places for people to go and congregate and learn are legendary. And I think back in the day, I took them for granted. And as the last year and a half has transpired, where we've, put our foot into that water too of continuing to create ecosystems. And I look back at some of those events, of course, it used to be called Michigan Growth Capital Symposium, now Midwest Growth Capital Symposium, or the slew of courses that you created at the university where you brought people in from the outside world to talk, okay, how do we do entrepreneurship? How do we do finance? I'm not even sure if the word venture capital was much known before you got going in the world of entrepreneurship. But I would love to take you back to, every community has a start and each of us has an entrance into that community. Tell us, how did you get involved to the level that you then were able to do all these things that we'll talk about in a few minutes? How did this all start for you? How did you enter this community?
Well, the first thing to point out, I guess a bit of a history lesson, is that the 1950s were probably the best decade that the auto industry ever had, coming out of World War II. For example, Germany and Japan were both flat on their back. Those are two auto producing companies, as we found out over the years. So we had, that is to say, Michigan had the market to itself. One of the first things that began to affect the state of Michigan was the outsourcing, really, of the manufacturing of the automobile. And we saw plants all over the country and so on, all American plants, but nonetheless taking away a little bit from Michigan. This all came to a head following that decade into the 60s, when all of a sudden we had a big shift that was barely recognized here, from an industrial economy to a knowledge and service-based economy. And the problem was we were not ready for it. We were still assuming that everything that prevailed before would prevail thereafter. There was an entity here known as the Institute for Science and Technology up on North Campus, part of the engineering school. And the people there, I'd started a company with Seth Bonder, who was a professor in engineering and had been my apartment mate at Ohio State. I know those two words are not necessarily honored here in
I
Ann
can't
Arbor,
believe that just came out of your mouth, but yes, okay.
I think so, but I'm here as a missionary, you know that. But anyway, we started this company and that became kind of known. And the people up at IST, Institute of Science and Technology, asked if I would address the following question, if they would get me a year off to do some work. Why do we have so many startups in Michigan that flame out or move away and succeed somewhere else? And so I did get some time off and a grant and so on and so forth, and it eventually wrote a book on it, which identified basically the fact that we had all the ingredients. They weren't laid out as they perhaps might have been, but we didn't have finance. We didn't have banks that were interested in doing this. The private sector was not interested in doing this because all the innovation and technological work was done within the oligopolistic system that we had, which was, three or four or five at that time automotive companies, three of which pretty much, still exist. And everything was a trade secret, pretty much. They did patents as well, of course, but you could hardly get anybody to share in those days. And the idea of startups was anathema to these guys. And there's several people who grunted it out and did make a success, were really few and far between. And as a matter of fact, they were raising their money not in Michigan, but in other countries and around the country and so on and so forth. So I said, okay, here, that was the problem, laid it all out. The book didn't make the New York Times bestseller list, but Governor Milliken and his folks read it, and people in Lansing got fairly excited about it. And we were probably one of the first states that began to direct the economic development activity toward entrepreneurship and technological entrepreneurship in particular. And so Milliken conducted the first tech conference in 1979. And in 1980, I started the Growth Capital Symposium. And the idea was that if existing companies were going elsewhere to get money, why couldn't I round up decent companies around Michigan and invite investors from both coasts and all over the place and other countries as well to come to Ann Arbor? And, I think everybody in the country knows about Ann Arbor, wants to come to Ann Arbor and all that sort of stuff. So they showed up, and the people who showed up and who spoke at the conference were kind of the murderer's row of the day. The leading, Bill Hambrecht was there, David Morgan Taylor, Stan Golder. Those are names that ring through the halls of venture capital and private equity even today. And the fact that they all showed up kind of gave it some cred. And so we went on from there. And we were drawing very, very well from around the country. The problem in those early days was we weren't getting much quality, and the companies were not doing well, and so on and so forth, because hardly anybody gave a damn for startups around Michigan. I mean, a few people and so on and so forth. And so that, led to kind of a struggle. But in 1982, a couple of important things happened. The Bayh-Dole Act was passed, which enabled universities now to profit from the research that they were doing. And also, the other thing that happened was that we had Governor Blanchard at the time helped get Public Act 55 passed, which made it proper, legal, and so on for the retirement system in Michigan to invest 7.5% of their corpus in venture capital. And I thought we had it made. I thought this was the answer to the maiden's prayer. If the private sector wouldn't come up, if the institutional investors in town wouldn't do it, well, we'd have a fund. But they all did it. They did it. They still do it, but they do it somewhere else, because the fact of the matter was you could find better deals elsewhere, and it was very difficult for local companies to find money here. And that went on for quite a while, to the point that I wondered why we even should have the program, but we kept it going. I think the biggest virtue is we've always done it, good years, bad years, and so on. And by the time we got to the late 90s, the business, that was the first big boom, followed by the first big crash, clearly, of the whole venture capital business, and the awareness in all parts of the country and so on. So with the crash came the I told you so's from all the people who, we didn't have much of an entrepreneurial culture in those days. And so after that, we struggled on. And the state government stepped in and, with the strategic fund and MEDC and Michigan Economic Development Corporation and so on. And one of the great things that they did a lot of things and put together a lot of funding and so on, but we began to organize the state into a set of smart zones in which there's at least one university and a number of counties and so on. And that has proven, to my mind anyway, to have been a pretty effective model. We have 4 or 5, whatever, sub ecosystems, you might call it, Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor are as different as one can imagine, but they're both ecosystems. Kalamazoo, Traverse City, various places like that. Detroit, certainly bigger and larger in terms of startups than the rest individually. And so that seems to be humming along. We also now have over 50 venture funds. Now, they're not all large, but we have found a way through state government money and grants from private sectors and from individuals to fund the startup requirements of companies. And so we have, 500 plus companies, maybe more than that, who are showing up in the state. The trick is, how do you get them to scale? And we can get them to scale in some cases by the interest generated around the country. And there are some very notable successes that we all think about and talk about and so on. And those are great. And those should be lessons for us in how to do it and where to go and all that sort of stuff. But we really do have to find ways to accelerate the development on average of these young companies and not have them just in a handful of ecosystems, but really have them spread around the state. We have an interesting state, of course, because we've got a lot of rural as well as urban areas. And those places increasingly offer a lower cost of doing business, better work accommodations and costs. And you wonder why anybody with the sense God gave a screwdriver would move from California to Texas rather than California to Michigan. That may be a local bias, but nonetheless it exists. So how I got involved in it, I guess, was because we had started a company and because there was a handful of professors around the country that were interested in entrepreneurship. And I got to be one of them. And I was the only finance guy that was involved. And we, one of our meetings somewhere, I think it was down in Baylor or whatever, the assigned topics were, one of them was why it's impossible to teach venture capital. And of course, that's the one I drew. And by the time I got about 30 pages written on the course design, I figured we could do it. So I took it to Gil Whitaker, who was the dean at the time. And he said, take it to the, relevant committee and see what they think. And I did, and they liked it. And nobody knew exactly what it was or what it was going to be or whether it would succeed. In the first class, we had 85 students, which was more than enough. And it's gone on from there. And then we've split it. I've been accused of slicing the salami a little thin, but that's not the case at all, I would say. And we now have 5 courses. The most recently formed one is 15 years old, and it is called Financing Technology Commercialization, where we marry 5 or 6 Michigan students from all over the university to young companies. And, work hard for 90 days and then bring them to usually 30 or 35 venture capital funds that show up to hear them make presentations at the end of the class. So all of those things are rolling on. The symposium rolls on. As you said, we tragically lost Mary Nixon this year. I ran it myself with students for 20 years. Mary joined, and Mary became more than a right hand. she became a miracle worker because there are always miracles involved in putting that program on, as you might imagine. So whether it continues, I don't know. Depends on the appetite, willingness of the university to do it. I think it should go on along with the private equity program, but we'll see. That was a longer answer than you wanted, probably.
No, it's a great answer because it gives us that overview of where you've been and what you've done, and especially in these two huge things, the Midwest Growth Capital Symposium and these classes. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that we've had doing development here at Into Being, we're in the community and we'll get a call and it'll be, hey, we're doing some research for one of Dr. Brophy's classes, or hey, my startup is, it's just, you just keep hearing it all throughout the community. So it's just been a really, really cool thing. And of course, I think in the local finance world, it's also been a place where, there's a nexus there happening. There's a nexus of communication. If I take you all the way back to that very first Growth Capital Symposium and what it took to get that started. I mean, if you think about it, Michigan being an automotive state, we know sort of hard things, capital equipment. We understand how finance works in the sense of, we can put dollars against objects and we can justify them in that way. We know what collateral is. Well, in a startup, it's everything's topsy-turvy. And how do you even do that? Two questions here, I think, and answer them how you will. One is, what did it take to sell VCs on Michigan to get them to come here in the first place? And you had some nice early wins there, but was there reticence, and what did it take to sell them on coming to the state? And also, what did it take to start selling people in the state who were used to a completely different kind of industry on the concept of VC and startup and entrepreneurship? How much selling did you have to do, and what did it look like?
I mean, I never even thought of it as selling. I thought it was so obviously clear that no one would disagree with it. But unfairly, of course, I had chummed the waters because I spent part of that grant money, traveling West Coast, East Coast, and so on, and met all these guys. And women, in fewer women in those days, but thankfully there are more women, including my daughter, who's vice president of a private equity fund. I did all that so I'd have a local source of investment funds, I guess, or something people might say, but that wasn't the case. But getting the people to come to Michigan was not at all difficult. First of all, Michigan was the industrial capital. It was the capital of the industrial economy, pretty clearly. Anywhere you went, it was Detroit. And they would come, just assuming that whatever we did around Detroit was probably pretty good. And the University of Michigan. I mean, who can deny the drawing power of the University of Michigan? And then, the fact that I had gone there and spoken to them and interviewed them, explained what I was trying to do and why I thought there was an upside to it, made sense. We had some decent companies at that time. One guy was trying to start a pizza company here in Ann Arbor, and he was on the program, and we learned about Domino's Pizza, And the fact of the matter was, there was some pretty good talent around here, pretty good stuff. And the worst thing is I never have ever known where they eventually get to, and we're doing better on that now. We do, in fact, all of this material from the symposium is going to be in the library here. They're building up a whole corner on entrepreneurship in Michigan, and the symposium is kind of front and center in it. So we'll know more about where they all ended up, pretty soon. The other thing, selling people, all the corporate guys said, this is California dreaming. It's got no place here. But remember, they were faced now with the advance of the knowledge-based economy. Their own business was dying, was falling flat on its face. I mean, Detroit and all the other automotive towns were becoming close to ghost towns. And so there was a desperation feeling that something had to be done. And this probably sounded as good as anything. And so we were able to get a little bit of help from them, but then they didn't know how to do it and they were scared of secrets getting out. I mean, why would you share something with some person who wanted to start, a standalone company? They would, the only experience any of them had was with supply chain companies, somebody that made lug nuts or bolts or something like that, and then they'd buy those or contract them so that they might as well have been owned, So they never had any experience in, here's venture capital, I'll sit on the board, let's see if we can build something out of this. That was entirely new. And I suspect it's why in the early days, our companies were not very strong because they weren't getting help. One thing that MEDC has brought clearly is an organization point around which people who are prepared to help companies can call. It's the thing we need in the universities. We are still academic in the universities. We got to get real. The commercialization course that I have, I would think the next step should be employing those students, make a deal with them, pay them in stock or something, get them to identify with the company, do it earlier in their stay at Michigan, take them in junior year if they're undergrads or year one if they're MBAs or God knows when they're PhDs. And I must say, everybody takes the course, everything from PhDs down to, I got freshmen that want in it and they're not allowed because the number doesn't fit or something. So I don't know if that got close to what you were asking me or not, but
yeah, it sounds like there was a sense in which the economy in Michigan at the time still had the reputation based on the industrial
sure thing.
base, but it was a fertile time to say, okay, where can we go next? What you said also about people wanting. Oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the really sharp-pointed pieces of evidence is that what we were looking for at that time, everybody said, yeah, we need a more diversified economy. Now, if you said, look, I have peanut trees here that I can plant, that would have fit under the term diversified economy. But hardly anybody was thinking about this idea of a technological entrepreneur coming out of the engine school or the med school or the science program or something like that, join with a law student, join with a finance student, join with a marketing student, small business, if you will, but a different kind of small business, They weren't delivering milk or serving ice cream or whatever. They were building something that would have a use, in a sense, over the next hill as we advanced, So you're absolutely right.
I think it's a really important point that you made of joining these things, that it's not just one discipline, but to draw people in from different disciplines and look at it. And some of the best programs that we've seen, I've actually seen one start up just in very, very recent years at other universities. Notre Dame is one that comes to mind, where they seemed to make a lot of traction very fast because they did exactly what you said. They took people from different disciplines and said, hey, let's get your perspective on this. Let's let you explore this for a little bit. And it seemed to strengthen things over just having a sort of a rehashing group of experts over there.
And speaking of that, we've had, Mary and I started, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, inviting all the universities, certainly all in the Midwest, to come to the symposium and bring their companies with them. And we gave them all a shot at the investors, and this, as a result, the other thing that it got going was they were talking to one another and comparing notes and saying, what works for you, what works for me, what doesn't work, and so on and so forth. And we need more of that in the Midwest. This is not just about Michigan, this is the whole damn Midwest, which is slowly losing the reputation of a flyover patch of dirt.
Yeah, it's really developing.
Yeah.
Well, in these events like the Growth Capital Symposium, and we have a listener question here about that, which I'll bring up here in just a second, but I don't know how long I've been going to that event. I was trying to just think the other day, did it predate our company into being here. I feel like I've been going to Growth Capital Symposium since the two startups I worked for beforehand, which I, hat tip to my bosses for letting me come, right, as an engineer, as a project manager, as an IP person, for doing that. But I've been coming to that thing ever since. And I think one thing that you said earlier struck me, because me going to Growth Capital Symposium as a tech guy, right? Well, open-minded, wanting to learn more, wanting to know more stuff, but like finance, and I didn't have to make the pitches. I wasn't the pitch deck guy or anything like that, never was gonna be. But I would always learn something at it. It was broad
Yeah.
enough that I'd be like, oh, so that's how you do that part that I've never touched and probably never will. But it held my interest to be able to be there and to get something out of it. So the breadth of people that found interest in it and have found interest in it, I think, is very, very telling.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been going for 41 years, so, just who's counting, right? But
I know I
the
don't
other,
have you beat.
on the other point that you mentioned, I mean, that's why I always brought in, we've always had incredible speakers willing to come, you know? Usually the CEO of really, really big venture funds. And the idea there was to let those people see what we're trying to do in Michigan, but also let our local people, see and hear from these people. And I could, talk till I'm blue in the face about what the opportunities are here. But when some guy comes from New York who runs a $1 billion fund and says, boy, oh boy, you really got something here, work it, get after it, and so on. That makes a bit of a difference. And I always have tried to give local leaders an opportunity as well, and get them and blend them. And we've always fed people well. We always had great dinners and great lunches.
I can attest to that.
Well,
yes to that.
And why do you do that? It's not for the nutritional value alone. It's to get them sitting with one another and, and whatever. So
Having
I think
that
it's always
conversation.
been a really good formula. And it now, look, every man and his dog is running one all around the world. I remember, guys come from Cleveland. Boy, this is great. The next thing I know, they're doing one in Cleveland. And I offer them help. I say, look, I'll help you do that if you want, because, and ours was the first one associated with the university. So it's good, and I hope it keeps going.
We have this question from Amy. She says, given the close proximity to Canada, have your symposiums drawn Canadian firms or investors, international deals?
I know a good girl named Amy. That's my daughter, probably, but it may not be Amy Brophy. I don't know, but
no,
yeah,
it's not in this case.
Oh, good. Okay, well, and Amy's not even home. So anyway, yeah, we've had companies from Toronto, and I've gone to Toronto, and I am Canadian and so on, but we had on this last one, we had the government of Canada actually running a program in it. So when I think of the Midwest, I think of Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba, as part of it. I know I'm cheating a little bit when I bring Quebec in, but yeah, no doubt.
That's very cool.
Open borders.
It's interesting you say that. We're going to have a conversation in about 2 weeks on the show in conference with MedHealth that they helped us put together. We're going to have a conversation just on that with relative to COVID and open borders, because we're obviously struggling with that right at the moment. A quick comment here from our friend Francis, who said Irwin Magnetics started in 1993, was the first direct investment from the state of Michigan retirement fund.
Herb Amster, a great friend of mine, was the CEO.
That's really cool.
And Sam Irwin ran Irwin Magnetics. Sam was involved in that, but Herb was involved in that, but had his own company later. And I'm not surprised it was the first investment.
Well, you referenced the smart zones. I have to reiterate, those smart zones have continued to do amazing things.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
so many
Oh, yeah.
entrepreneurs of all sizes come through those, and we still see
Yeah.
them to this day. They're as active today as they were when I started
No
in
question.
things, maybe more so.
Yeah.
Well, I want to look with you, as we look back and some of these challenges. You mentioned the challenge of quality companies. Um, you said Michigan was ready for this. I think one of the reasons we wanted to do that look back with you is because even in my own career, I've noticed that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't had the inputs from things like the Growth Capital Symposium. If I hadn't been aware that there was a community that I had access to, maybe I wasn't a
Yeah.
big member of it, but I knew that that was out there and there was something I could do about it. The things that we're doing today wouldn't be happening without that. As you and I talked before, David, I think one thing came very clear to me, is oftentimes many people think, what's the bottom dollar of this thing that I'm doing right now? I've got to make a buck off of this. And I think as we've tried to belabor to our audience, we want our outreach things to be completely open and free. It's the only way they actually have value to a community. I'm sure you became a multimillionaire off of Growth Capital Symposium alone, right? I mean, that was obviously a gigantic moneymaker, right? Or not?
Well, I just lost you for about 10 seconds. I'm afraid you said something that
Oh, I
I'd
said
like to
something
hear
profound and then,
repeated.
no. So I think a lot of people will think that, they have to make a buck off of everything that they do. And so they'll look, I'll have people ask me like, well, I hope you're making money off of MedTech Crossroads. And I'm like,
I've
no,
lost
but it's,
you.
oh no, we lost you again.
Yeah. Say it again.
Okay, we'll try a third time. I think a lot of times people think that you have to make a buck off of everything that you do. So people look at me with MedTech Crossroads and they'll say, well, I hope you're making money off of it. And they'll look at things like Growth Capital Symposium and they'll say, hope you're making money off of it. But one of the things I've noticed in talking with you is you're a guy who wants to
You're
get people to,
gone again.
oh, we're losing it. Let me see if I can actually type the question out. Hope we can get David's connection working a little better here. Just 1 second, folks. I'll give it 1 second here to see if it gets any better. Can you hear me now, David?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to make it really succinct. So the thing that I wanted to focus on for a second is this question of contributing to a community just to see the community grow, because you know that it's going to be good for you, it's going to be good for everybody. And it's something that I think it's easy to lose sight of. My sense in talking with you is that Growth Capital Symposium was as much a labor of love as it was a direct money-making activity. Tell us a little bit about that philosophy.
Well, not much philosophy to it. I've never taken a dime out of it at all. I mean, we got Mary paid, but I've always wanted to keep the price low so that everybody could afford it. And, if you look at the same program offered in other places, the prices, multiples of what we charge. And I just never did it. I had lots of offers from people who wanted to make it commercial, and I always thought it should be in the university. The university didn't always agree with me because they never worked a hell of a lot on it, but nonetheless, that's where it should be. And if we're gonna get anywhere, look at the biggest contribution the university is making now through tech transfer. That's what we should be doing. And we should do the same thing with our students, get them involved, and so they don't run for the border after graduation. So I've made plenty of money doing other things and so on and so forth, and never wanted to take money from it because I didn't want people thinking I did it for the money. Because I asked people, these guys come from the West Coast and the East Coast and other countries and so on, and I never pay them a dime. They come because I asked them. And they come because I asked them, because I probably visited them in their home office at one point. And that's just, I don't know, that, you know.
I think it's a fascinating thing. It's one thing I wanted to bring attention to because we often take for granted these opportunities for connection. We often take them
Yeah.
for granted, or we think that somebody's making a buck off the opportunity for connection and we don't want it. But I think we have to understand that the community that is doing this kind of stuff in Michigan has been one that has received the philanthropy of time and the philanthropy of
Yeah.
talent to just invest the time to say, I want to see these companies make it. I want to put investors and companies together. And that we need more people doing that kind of thing for this kind of a community to grow. I think it's just a very, very important thing to recognize because it's easy to step back and think, oh, well, if I just go focus on my business, then things are going to go well. But
I think I agree with you. I mean, it's binary. There's some people who go all out and do it and so on willingly, and others who, if they don't see any immediate interest, just walk away. The one thing I guess that could improve the program is if our success companies in the state of Michigan would participate, would show up, and would come and meet the investors who come and sing our praises, not us, not me or anybody else in particular, but the praises of Michigan. Why should you come here? What's in it, for your company? You aware of the differences in cost and availability? Do you know what that big building up there is? That University of Michigan, let's go look at tech transfer. All these sorts of things, they're best done by somebody who's just raised a ton of money. The best example of this is Doug Song. The guy is tireless in selling Ann Arbor and staying in Ann Arbor and all that sort of stuff, and it all sounds corny perhaps to some people, but boy, oh boy, if you want to pull this place up by its bootstraps, and let me tell you, it's been down to bootstrap level. We showed, when that big transition took place in the economy, we were absolutely down and out. People coming, taking photographs of the Packard plant for putting in magazines and so on to show how bad off we were. And everything that we've talked about today is still driving to improve. I mean, that's what Danny Gilbert is about, and a lot of other people that don't have as much money as Dan has, but they're all swinging a pick, and we just need more people to do it and get involved and do it.
the most cliche way to say it is give back, right? Or pay it forward. But there's a reason that those phrases are out there because that's what has built
They do
communities like
survive.
that.
But I've never used those phrases, and I wouldn't know. I would consider them sort of latte liberal or whatever you want to call it. Just do it. Just get involved. Just walk up and say, "What can I do?" and get going, because this stuff's not very glamorous. It's
Make
no
it
fun
happen.
asking people for money for somebody else. For that. So,
We had another
anyway,
question here.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, little delay there. How did the symposium fare going virtual? And the questioner said, curious if you were able to attract more people as they didn't have to travel, vice versa. How does virtual
Yeah,
work look?
we had something like, I think we had 600 people online the last one, and we used to get probably 400, something like that, when they would show up, and now the trick will be, what do we do going forward? You're going to do it hybrid, which I see some programs are doing, or what, and in a way, hybrid's not bad, because if you could go back to the in-person program that we had, where we drew from the Midwest, let's say, with occasional people from either coast. But now, if you're in Laredo, Texas, you can turn on and see if there's anything there that you're interested in, and other countries, I mean, we have Michigan, we've got 560,000 living alums. They're all over the bloody planet. I can reach every one of them if they want to look and see what's going on in Ann Arbor, or what's going on in Michigan. So there's that to it. And there it's a matter of the technology. What kind of platform do you have, and so on. And we partnered with this group from St. Louis, which, by the way, is a great group, and a great source of comparison to us. If you want to see enthusiasm and in hard work, go look there. So, but they came through, and I think we had very good quality.
That's really cool. 50% bump isn't bad for going
No,
virtual there. That's
no,
not bad
not
at
at
all.
all.
Well, in the few minutes that we have left here, David, I want to look forward to the future. I think
Yeah.
there's one message that we've made here thus far, and that's there's been a lot of work put in to create the ecosystem that we have here in the Midwest today in terms of startups, entrepreneurship, funding, high tech, med tech, et cetera. What are the new challenges or the unsolved challenges? What are the things that we should be looking at and saying, we've been working on this, but we still haven't solved this, or here's the new challenge that has emerged based on all the work that we have done? What are the maybe top 3 things that you would look at and say, this is where folks need to be working now?
Oh, I think retention of talent is the biggest one, because right now, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, people go from graduation platform to the airport practically, and they go somewhere else. They go somewhere else to get worse living conditions, probably worse working conditions, all because they think it's the shiny object that they got to gravitate to. And the only way you cure this is not by exhortation or arm twisting or anything like that. I think get them involved in a company as early as they can. And if they leave at the end, let them take some stock with them. Let them say, look, I'm going wherever I'm going, but we'll stay in touch. And you'll set a fish hook in that kid that he won't be able to get rid of. I think that's what I would do.
Well, I think you just told my story, David. I was working for the university, and right after graduation, didn't quite know what direction I wanted to go. And one day, Kalyan Handik said, "Hey, can we chat over at Pierpont Commons?" and offered me a job with this new startup. I've been here ever since, right? So I think you're onto something.
Yeah. Well, you took my class, So anyway, I think that's a big one. I think that mobility is still a big bet for us, because it's Michigan against the Valley. And when I talk to the mobility people in Michigan, they think the Valley is full of gadgeteers, and we're the guys who have to actually produce things and make things, and be concerned about safety and all that sort of stuff. So we may not end up the winners in mobility. I don't know. Germany may do it. Who knows? I don't know. So why not go back to what we started with, was diversification. Let's look at life science. Let's look at other kind of science. Let's look at soft tissue issues in companies, psychology and the like. These things are all happening, and they don't have 4 wheels necessarily on them, So let's broaden the scope of what we're doing. We've got the talent, and the hell of it is, people from other places want to come here. They love Ann Arbor, They've heard of it. They've never been here. They still heard of it and love it. And the University of Michigan's great. Let's show everybody that we're great. Let's get actively involved. I think if you do those 2 things, you marry those 2 things. And when the students that you're trying to retain and those from somewhere else that you're trying to attract, when they see that you're, active in all kinds of spaces, they'll take that as a plus, and they'll find a place the way you did,
When there's one opportunity and the next opportunity, you can sort of see it over the horizon. You don't get the feeling of, oh, I need to walk out. But it doesn't take a million opportunities. It takes the ones that make you say, yeah, there's enough here for me to work with. Those are
now,
great perspectives.
in fairness, let me say one thing. It's easy, and it sounds sometimes like I'm always rapping the auto companies and so on. I've worked for GM and I worked for Ford both, and seen good and bad things there. But, we led the world starting from 1900. We were the most innovative patch of dirt in the country for two things. We made the most useful product possibly, might say, known to people in this country, the automobile or the truck, whatever your favorite is. And we also invented and perfected systems and ways of doing things, to the point that we created Will I Run in World War II and built the bombers, etc., that won World War II. The curious thing is why we dropped the hell out of Will I Run after World War II. And it's taken us to this day, practically, to put a mobility center back in there, okay? And we still account for most of the tech in the auto industry, okay? And they're still inventing stuff that they still don't let out the door, okay? And so they're not the natural friend of the startup, but to their great credit, they're acquiring startups. Look at Rivian, for example, just one example. Those guys moved here to do that for exactly that reason. And so we got to be fair to the car companies, because they're still bread and butter for a lot of people, and they're still the source of all kinds of wealth and income for this state. So our ecosystems can't just ignore them. We got to find a way, and this goes for everybody. We got to find a way to interact and to join together in various activities, not hold back. That's why I mentioned Bayh-Dole. That was the lightning bolt that hit the university. We can now make money off of this stuff. The other lightning bolt was 1992, when the endowment began to invest in venture capital and private equity. 1992, Before that, years back, that money was managed by the trust department of the National Bank of Detroit, which no longer exists. So you see, all of these things are changes, somewhat. Some of them are dramatic, some of them not so dramatic. Some of them are well known, some of them are totally unknown. But it's like bumper pool or something, and these things have happened, and here we are. And there are more of those down the road.
Well, that's the thing we look to everybody to participate in and to contribute and to give back on, is to really continue to grow that community and to recognize what it's taken to get to the point that we're at, and then to keep going forward and keep looking forward to what comes next.
It's as hot as a pistol right now, and everybody they'll listen to this program and say, "Who the hell is that old guy, and what's he talking about?" It's never been that way, they'll say. And I guess this is just how the West was won, or something like that,
Well, I think that's the message for the day, is that
everybody contribute.
Got a little delay there. We can slip back into apathy, right? We can slip back into apathy from wins that have been made. And that's a really important thing to recognize. Well, we're at our time now. David, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story and giving us some vision to look forward to. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. And I repeat, this is a great thing that you're doing, and it represents what I think is very, very important, maybe to add onto the list. We got to talk to each other. We got to help each other. We got to just, you don't have to be positive. You can argue with people too, but get involved, because don't take anything for granted. We got to fight and scrap. Even Michigan football has to fight and scrap these days. So,
Never thought we'd be there.
you know,
David Brophy, thank you for being with us today.
I did play hockey for Ohio State, so I just want you to know that as a point of truth and preference. I didn't want to tell you at the start because I thought you might cancel the broadcast. But
no, at this
anyway.
at this point, we'll take all the sports we can get.
Okay, good enough.
David, thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wonderful. As promised, I want to share just a little bit of the news, the COVID news and the local news today. So in terms of the, we've got our share working wrong here. We're going to bring it back up right. In terms of COVID metrics and vaccine distribution, I'm not going to go through the whole CDC list again today. Suffice to say, it's looking very similar to how it did last week, with the community spread being a little lower than it was last time. But 12% PCR positives coming back up. So it's interesting that is coming back in a positive direction now. We are going to be talking the next 2 episodes of MedTech Crossroads in partnership with MedHealth. Stacy Frankovich and Paul Reiser over there, wonderful folks, and they proposed, hey, let's get together because we know these questions are coming up. We will source some of the guests and some of the topics. Let's talk about it on MedTech Crossroads. We said, what a great idea. July 16th, COVID vaccines, boosters, and variants. We're trying to get down to the science. We're trying to stay away from the public policy and just talk in that about the science of what is going on. You hear about things like the Delta variant. What should we think about that? We're going to be talking with 2 prominent doctors from Beaumont and Henry Ford Health System that day. Then July 23rd, actually, as David and I were talking about, the border between the U.S. and Canada, is an awful lot of trade that goes over that, but that's been largely shut down. When should that reopen? What should happen? The differing policies of 2 different countries create a lot of havoc. We'll be talking about that with some experts on July 23rd. And don't forget the $2,500 quarterly MedTech Crossroads pitch party. It's not a competition. We just like to talk about these startups and then tip our hat towards one at the end. Of course, our panel of judges, judging that, not into being ourselves. If you want to participate and you're a startup, a MedTech startup, send your pitch deck to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org, and we will look forward to seeing you at the pitch party. Our judges for that are Andy Rader, Dr. Nikki Kennedy, Jim Metzger, and Stacy Frankovich. Also, don't forget the A2 Biosocial is coming up here, presented by Mish Bio, Spark, and MyLead on Tuesday, July 13th. That's this coming Tuesday from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. And that is happening York, 1928 Packard Street in Ann Arbor. Go and check out the Biosocial. I think that is our news for the day, as we always do. I want to open it up for any comments or any questions from our audience, any community events that you know of that are going on. We would love to hear about them if you'd like to tell us. So we'll leave it open for another 30 seconds here in case someone wants to raise their hand in Zoom to ask us a question or to tell us about something that's happening today or in the upcoming weeks. Well, not seeing any announcements. I want to thank you for being here. Thanks for being with us on MedTech Crossroads. We will see you next week for the program in partnership with MedHealth when we're talking about vaccines, boosters, and variants. Oh my, looking forward to it next Friday. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.